welcome to another episode of the Family Gamers Podcast. This is episode 393.
Hey everybody, hello. We are super excited to do another show for you. We've got some fun things to talk about, but first, Anitra, who are we? I am, of course, your host, Andrew. And I am joined, as I mentioned, by my lovely and wonderful wife, Anitra.
That's me.
We are the Family Gamers. Very excited to be bringing another show to your ears. This week, we're going to be talking about some board game terms.
Yeah, it's been a really long time since we kind of defined some board game terms and talked about what those mean in games, so we're going to do that again.
Yep. It's going to be a lot of fun. But first, we've got some first half of the show stuff to do, including a fact and a sponsor message, what we've been playing, and then maybe after the break, we'll welcome our new members to the community this week, talk about some back talk, stuff like that. We'll see how it all goes. But first, we're going to start with a fact. Are you ready, Anitra?
I'm ready because I researched this fact for you.
I know.
But you can reveal it.
Way to let the proverbial cat out of the bag.
You can reveal it. I thought this was really cool.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really cool in the sense that it's a Star Trek fact, and we're a bunch of giant nerds.
Okay, cool's maybe not the right word. I thought it was interesting because I'm a Star Trek nerd.
There you go. That is accurate. And if you also are a Star Trek nerd, you'll probably hear this and say, oh, cool, and then move on with your life. In the show Star Trek Voyager, they were always finding new and unexplainable phenomena. This is, of course, because they were in the Delta Quadrant.
Yes.
Right. Unlike all of the other lame Star Trek. So the interesting 393 fact is that the cast uses the phrase, some kind of, like, Captain, there is some kind of unexplained phenomenon. They've used the phrase, some kind of, 393 times over the course of their 7 seasons.
So I found a fan-made video that documents them all. It's about 9 minutes long.
It is a 9-minute supercut of some kind of stuff.
Yes.
That's
it's
exactly
some kind of video.
It is some kind of video. Anyway, so that's our fact this week. 393 some kind ofs in the 7 seasons of Star Trek Voyager.
But as we mentioned, we also have a message from our sponsor. Recently, a listener asked about how to balance financial priorities now versus ones down the road, like college savings and retirement. I mean, if you're us, college savings is not that far down the road anymore.
It is not that far down the road.
Anyway, first and foremost, you want a stable foundation, which means an adequate emergency fund and manageable debt. Once that's taken care of, consider the priorities and costs of each of your goals. Ask yourself, if you had to pick a more stable retirement or a better university for your children, which one is your priority? Then start saving towards your top priorities, giving the most attention to the top 1 or 2, but still putting some funding into your other goals. The trick is to get to a point where you're saving some for the near future, some for the midterm, and some for long term. You don't want to put all of your savings toward long-term goals and not have any fun along the way. And at the same time, you need to have something saved for retirement, otherwise you'll have to live off of whatever Social Security you've been able to earn, which won't leave much room for fun in the future. If you want to talk to an expert about prioritizing your goals and saving for the future, go to firstmovefinancial.com/familygamers to set up a time for free to see if they can help you make your first move.
All right. Thanks again to the team at First Move Financial for sponsoring another episode of the Family Gamers Podcast. So, Anitra, we actually got a bunch of games in.
Yeah, we played some games in the last 2 weeks.
Sure did, yeah. So the first one is a game that is both a review game and also a game that's been sitting on our shelf of opportunity for a couple of years.
Oddly enough, yes.
It has not been waiting for a review for a couple of years,
no.
However. And that is the game Medieval Academy.
Yeah, so we had the older version of this sitting on our shelf of opportunity, and it just kind of never quite made it until we got a copy of the new refresh for reviewing.
Like soup to nuts refresh, really.
Yeah, well, I mean, but we didn't know that because we hadn't played the original yet.
So we knew we had to play the original first and then play the newer version. So a lot of things in here. I think that if you know the game, you know the game. And what I will say is the new version still pretty much does the same thing. It's
mechanically, it still does all the same things. Yes.
Loop. But they've updated some of the things. There's no longer this kind of, I don't know, chivalry, please the damsel track.
Yes, right? It's now the cooking track.
The cooking track, which is fine. There aren't disparate boards scattered around the table, right? There's one player board.
One board.
You're much more obviously progressing along tracks instead of working your way around the edges of the the kind
Each
of
of the
cards
7
or
boards,
whatever you would call them. You all play as anthropomorphic animals now instead of human knights.
Yeah, the art's a little cutesier, more like kids' cartoon about chivalric animals. But also, they did a complete refresh of the rules. For that reason alone, I would recommend the new version, because the rules in the old version were not super clear.
Yeah, even in the 1 or 2 times we played the old version, we had questions about the rules, and when we opened up the new one, you specifically looked for those answers and got them.
Yeah, I was like, okay, this was a problem and this was a problem. Did they fix that? Oh, yep, super clear. This is addressed, this is addressed. So that part was good. There were a couple things we did not like quite so much in the new one, but they're not deal breakers.
I mean, I would go so far as to say that if you like Medieval Academy, it is very likely that you will prefer the new one to the old one.
Yeah, for the most part, I think that's true.
Yeah. So that is our very quick review of that.
We also got inspired after our last episode about flowers and plants. We played Power Plants.
We did.
It was fun.
It was.
That's about all we have to say about that one, but it was fun.
I mean, Power Plants is a great game from Kids Table Board Games, so obviously it being KTBG, you know it's not going to be too terribly complicated.
Yeah.
In Power Plants, you play as a wizard who is trying to enchant different types of plants to do your bidding.
More or less, yeah.
It is a tile placement and area control game, I guess.
Area control / area majority. I mean, we did talk about it 2 weeks ago, but it had been quite a while since we'd played. So it was really nice to actually play it again.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I won. That's the important part.
Is it?
Let's say yes.
You know what else you won?
Royal Visit.
Yes, you did win a Royal Visit.
Yeah.
We still really like this 2-player card game, tug-of-war game, but you are definitely better at it than me.
Well, I don't win every time, so it's not like I'm just playing better. Like,
yeah.
Sometimes I just get better cards.
Sometimes you just get lucky.
And that kind of happens in Royal Visit. But Project L, on the other hand.
Yeah, so you had played this a couple of times before, and I mentioned, I'm like, yeah, no, I've never played it. You're like, what?
Yeah.
I could have sworn I played this with you. So you pulled it out, you taught me, it was great. And then the next night I was like, hey, let's play Project L again, because my brain gets it now, and it was easy to hop right into. I do really like the game now that I have played it. So I think we'll be revisiting that one again. Maybe I'm weird, but that works really well for me as a cozy kind of game. I know, like, plain Tetris polyominoes and, like, black and white, no decoration at all, probably doesn't say cozy to most people. Maybe it's just my brain. But I don't have to work too hard, but there's still a challenge there.
I think it's more about it being something that you can easily wrap your mind around, so you don't have to work so it's comfortable.
Yeah.
I don't think cozy is the right word.
I mean, it's cozy for me. Cozy for my brain.
Because it's not working hard.
Yeah.
It's like you can play that game when your brain's in pajamas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. When my brain is in pajamas, that's a perfect way to put it.
The theme is not a cozy.
The theme doesn't care. Yeah.
All right, next on the list, we're moving really quick, but that's okay, is a game that we played before, but we played again, the game Mezen from Arcane Wonders.
Yeah, I also played this one solo in preparation for our next Snap review, which will be coming this Friday. Mezen has a really interesting art style.
Yeah, it's an ancient art style. I mean, that's what it is.
I mean, ancient-ish, except the earliest examples of it they can find are only from the 19th century.
Okay, so the earliest examples of this they can find are that old, but it's definitely inspired by, like, ancient.
Yeah, it's a folk art. It's probably been around for centuries, but because it was generally painting on wood items that were used all the time, you know what decays? Wood items that are used all the time.
Yeah. That's why it's rare to find a 50-year-old boy's bike, but very common to find a 50-year-old girl's bike.
Something like that,
I learned that from those Scrapper shows.
So, super interesting art style. Very primitive looking, very Nordic looking.
Yeah.
The game itself ends up being a solo-ish, like, tile shifting puzzle.
Mm-hmm. So in this game, there are 10 goals for tile orientation. You
for 10
only
rounds.
Ever see 2 of them at a time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so a new one is revealed every round. You know what the next round is going to be as you're sort of making some of your decisions. And the general gameplay loop is that the active player picks an icon
Yep.
And then both players choose, they have their own grid of 25 of these tiles, choose any one grouping of that icon to remove from the board. Tiles shift down, they just fall straight down. You flip all of the tiles that were removed over, and there's some other icons on the back. And one side of the icons is white, and one side of the icons is black. And so there's an additional piece in there where you score the black ones. Everything starts white, and then halfway through you score all the black ones, and then at the end of the game you score all the white ones.
Yep.
So there's a bunch of different shifting things going on kind of all at the same time. You really can't accomplish all of them perfectly. Like, it's not possible.
No. Well, and also some of the goals, most of the goals are placing the animal icons in specific parts of your grid, but some of them have to do with black tiles or white tiles or combinations of black tiles and white tiles. So it's all over the place. You don't know what kind of goals are going to show up, but you do know that you want a lot of stuff turned to the black side by the midpoint of the game, and you want most things turned back to the white side by the end point of the game.
Right. So, I mean, it's an interesting game, right? It's nice that it has a very defined start and end.
Yes.
It's not going to, take forever to play this game. It's portable in the sense that it's not a big box, but it definitely has, I wouldn't call it a table hog, but it's got a significant table presence to it.
Yeah, it's got significant table space. It goes up to 5 players, but it's what we often call a multiplayer solo game. The only player interaction is naming off what animal icon to flip over. And in a multiplayer game, you can do a little bit of kind of giving people these wild tokens in order to change the animal that you yourself are going to use. That's it. There's no other interaction. The goals don't depend on what anybody else is doing. You're always just looking at your own stuff.
Yeah. I have some nits to pick with some of the component quality of this game. I think they kind of cheaped out a little bit, but other than that, the game is pretty interesting. It's a very unique art style, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the big draw. Everything is white, black, and red.
Yep.
In this game.
No other colors in the entire game, just white, black, and red, including all of the player-specific pieces.
Yeah.
They're indicated by shapes rather than color, which I think is a really cool way to do it. My nits to pick are mostly with the rulebook, which is not bad, but is not what I wanted it to be.
Sure. Okay.
Speaking of solo games, I played some other solo games on my own. Some Strato, which we reviewed a week or two ago. I played some A Gentle Rain, which I think these days is probably my favorite solo game. And a little bit of A Nice Cuppa during our kids' piano lesson. I think I need to get the expansions for A Nice Cuppa, because it's cozy and simple, but I'm starting to want something more when I play it.
Okay. I mean, that's what an expansion's for.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. We have obviously been playing more Floristry.
So much Floristry.
That game just continues to be fantastic.
I'm going to call it right now. I think Floristry is going to be our top game of 2025.
Listen, there's a lot of 2025 to go.
I know.
I would
putting
say,
my marker
here's what
down.
I'm going to say. I think it is almost certainly a top 5 game. Of the things that I know that are coming out this year, I don't know that there's anything I'm more excited about than I am excited about Floristry now.
Sure. I am open to being surprised, but I really don't think I'm going to see another game this year that is going to keep me coming back the same way Floristry does.
I get it. I totally do. I just, hey, everybody, come out swinging. That's all I can say about that. Yep.
Another really great 2-player game, though, that we've been playing a little bit more is Obelisk.
Yeah. Here's the thing about Obelisk. It has an understated but impressive table presence. We were playing this at the restaurant that we go to, and because the cards are like a metallic shiny, and all of the dice are these cool, like, obelisk kind of shaped dice.
Yeah.
And then there's the red tokens that you put on everything. Our waitress just was like, that looks amazing. What is that? And tell me everything about it. And we explained it, and she's like, I'm going to pick that up. Narrator, she's not going to pick it up.
It's okay.
Yeah, but it's fine. But yeah, I mean, it looks great, and, people notice it.
And it is super portable.
Yes, that game is very portable.
So portable.
Love it.
I love it. All right, and I have just one more. We got from our friend Daniel Rocky a copy of his new game, S'mores Galore, and we finally got a chance to play it.
Yep.
This is exactly what I have been hoping for in a s'mores game for like the last decade. For those of you who have been sticking with us for a long time, the worst review score I have ever given on the Family Gamers was to a s'mores-themed game. I think it was just called like S'mores the card game or something like that. It was a long time ago. It was a long time ago.
It was a sad time.
It was not a good game.
The Family Gamers. Yeah.
S'mores Galore is completely child approachable. It's simple. It's got a little bit of strategy in it, so you're not going to get bored. It's not just luck. You've got choices to make. Your choices mean something, but none of the choices are hard. And this is not a game where, you're going to train yourself up to do it really well, nor is it a game where it's just going to be like, all right, whatever I get, I get. It's simple enough for pretty much anybody in your family to play. You probably want just a little bit of reading ability and the ability to sit still for a 20 to 30 minute game. But it's a great family game. Like, all of the pieces really just come together well for it. So I am excited to share this with other members of the family, and it may replace one or two of the games that have historically come camping with us.
What? I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
The name of the game and all that stuff. So definitely a good opportunity when we do the camping trip to bring some more along. All right. I said we were going to do the Family Gamers community stuff after the break, but it's up to you.
It was quick. Let's do it now.
All right, let's do it. All right, I'm going to go over to the post. I mean, come on. It's Alec Trebek saying, "We're delighted to have you here."
I miss Alex Trebek.
Me too. Anyway. I'll start us off with welcome to Cristobal.
Welcome to Chico.
Welcome to Jody.
Welcome to Debbie.
Debbie of
Wise Wizard Games.
That's right. Welcome to Flavian.
Welcome to States.
And welcome to Matt.
Matt used to be my next door neighbor when we were kids.
Aw, that's so cute.
Thanks for joining, Matt.
Well, thanks for joining the Family Gamers community. I hope all of you, Matt and everybody else, find some really great games as a result of the conversations there, and just ask some good questions, give some good insights, all sorts of things like that. We really would appreciate it. Have fun in the community, y'all, and follow the rules.
Yeah.
All right, and with that, we are going to take a quick break. We're going to listen to a Snap review, probably for Strato, because you mentioned Strato, so why not?
Mm-hmm.
And then when we come back, we're going to talk about some board game terms. Should we tell them what the terms are?
Nah, they can wait.
Breathless.
It'll probably say it in the title of the podcast. So look there.
Know. All right. Well, anyway, with that being said, we'll be right back.
Have you ever played a game all about the weather?
Well, there was Sub-Astral, but that was more about biomes. And then we played the seasonal games like Winter and Autumn, but even those weren't really about the weather.
Well, there's a solo game that I've been trying recently called Strato. It's all about the movement of the air, which is the weather.
Sure.
This is a snap review for Strato.
Strato is a solo card game with 10 different puzzling scenarios designed by Sophia Wagner and published by Helvetic. The box says it's best for ages 8 and up and plays in about 15 minutes. And let's face it, since it's a solo game, I'm going to leave the next part up to you.
The art in Strato is appropriately atmospheric. These illustrated cards represent lots of different kinds of weather with layers of color. There are 3 other kinds of cards besides the weather cards, though. There's also 10 challenge cards, player aids that show what each weather type does, and a tornado card matching each weather type. Instead of a central board, there's a set of 16 small tiles that fit together to make a long line, which show just how large the game can get. Since this is a game about weather and climate change, the publisher sought to make Strato as eco-friendly as possible, with no plastic and responsible sourcing of all the materials. Let's move on to the mechanics. Strato is not exactly a single game. It's more like 9 puzzle games that share a common rule set. In every puzzle, you'll be playing cards to make a specific arrangement around one or more central tornadoes. Start by choosing a puzzle. They're numbered 0 through 9, with number 0 being a training puzzle to help you understand how the game works. Make the play area by connecting the numbered tiles to make a board showing the maximum card limit on each side of the center. This could be as few as 6 tiles or as many as 8. Then collect all the cards with the weather types needed for this puzzle, and place the tornado cards in the center spots, the number 1s on the board. If there are more than 2 types of weather, assemble the tornado cards in random pairs to allow for multiple rows of cards above the tiles. Shuffle all the weather cards you'll need into a deck, then place 2 cards next to each tornado. During this setup phase, no 2 adjacent cards should show the same weather type. Take any cards you couldn't place in the setup and reshuffle them into the deck. Then draw 3 cards for your starting hand. Each time you play a card, place it at the end of a row. Then do its effect. For wind, take any card from this same row and move it away from the wind in a way that definitely changes the layout of the row. For rain, you take the card from the opposite end of the same row, insert it next to any tornado card. If you play a sun, take a card from the same row and discard it. If you play a fog, swap 2 cards that are in the same column, or a card and an empty space that are in the same column. The cards you swap don't have to be anywhere near the fog card. If you play a cloud, copy the action of the card you played on your last turn. And if you play a storm, you swap a card at the end of any row with any other card that's at the end of a row. After completing the card effect, draw a new card to bring your hand back up to 3. You win the game by matching the goal on the challenge card, a specific puzzle pattern on a specified number of rows. You lose by overflowing the number of card slots shown on the board, or by running out of cards to play. There's also a way to play Strato with more than 1 player, by giving each player a hand of 2 cards and taking turns playing a card. If you play this way, you can talk about what you're doing, but you cannot tell others which cards you have in hand. Hey, Andrew, you're back. So let's talk about what we expected with this game.
So I know you like solo games, and this looked like it could be potentially a good cooperative game too. That was pretty much all I expected.
Anyone who has followed us for a while probably knows that I like solo games, as long as they're compact and fast. Strato seemed to be right up my alley, and the weather theme is unusual. That plus the art did really catch my attention. But let's dive into what surprised us.
Yeah, so first we tried to learn Strato together as a cooperative game before playing it solo. Frankly, that was a bad idea. You really need to understand how these puzzles work before you can try to play them cooperatively. There's enough different kinds of stuff going on that if you have 2 people who learn differently, it's actually really challenging to put the pieces together right away. Second, it definitely was not anywhere near as easy to learn as I had hoped. The game rules are set up to try to explain everything you could do, but the first 2 puzzles are way simpler and they set up with a lot less randomness. If I was teaching this to someone, I would probably start there instead of trying to explain what everything does right away. This is the kind of game where layering rules on over progressive plays really would have helped out a lot.
I found that I had to play each puzzle at least once just to understand how it worked before I could try to understand how to solve it. That's not a bad thing necessarily, but it's not what I expected from a solo game. And it felt harder than I really wanted because the setup is kind of a pain. These tiles that make up the main board are very small, and if you care about the art and matching them up, you have to closely examine them to make sure that you're matching them up correctly. Doing that for 12 or more tiles? That feels like a lot. And then I have to make sure that I'm using only the appropriate types of weather for each puzzle. At this point, I start to ask myself why I'm doing all this setup for a game that takes 15 minutes or less.
So Anitra, do we recommend Strato?
While I don't absolutely love it, I would tentatively recommend Strato for folks who want a challenging solo game that's still pretty fast. It's a really interesting series of puzzles, and after the 3rd one, the randomization of the setup and the deck means there's a good amount of variation every time you play.
Despite the small box, this is not a compact game. The width of the card line setup alone means you're going to need a decent-sized desk or table to play this one.
We're going to give Strato 3 clouds in a stormy sky.
And that's Strato in a snap.
And we're back.
Hello, it is term time.
Yeah, so the two kinds of terms that we've been thinking about lately are asymmetric games or asymmetric player powers and auction games or bidding games.
Yep, absolutely.
So let's start with asymmetric games.
Well, before we even get into the games part, talking about symmetry, which a lot of people have heard of, and asymmetry, which is something that sounds similar but is different.
Well, asymmetry is the lack of symmetry.
Okay.
And symmetry is when two halves or two items are identical.
Okay, so the truth is that most people that are listening to this have probably played both symmetric and asymmetric games.
Probably, yeah.
But they just didn't realize that's what they were. So I'll take a very simple game like Zombie Kids Evolution, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in this game, you are working together, but each player, once you get far enough into the game, has their own special power for their player.
So this is a game that starts symmetric.
Correct.
And becomes asymmetric.
Yes.
Yes.
In fact, in many games, it's actually easier, even if they're ultimately going to be an asymmetric game, to start off playing them symmetrically so you can understand the general rules of the game, because often special player powers will bend or break the general rules of a game.
Sure. So when we say asymmetric games, what we're talking about here is players don't all have exactly the same actions or exactly the same goals.
Mm-hmm.
This is more than just like, oh, well, my starting hand looked different than your starting hand, or the cards that I got look different than the cards you got.
Or my color is different from your color.
Right. It's literally you cannot do exactly the same things as everyone else in the game.
Right. So there are good things about asymmetric games, but there are also bad things about asymmetric games. So let's talk about a little bit of both of those.
Sure. I mean, good, they're more interesting, usually. Especially if you have that kind of game where you said, like, your asymmetric player powers break one of the rules. Like, it feels really good. It feels really powerful to be like, oh, I can just ignore this rule that everybody else has to do.
Well, not only that, but also it makes you feel special, especially if this is some kind of a cooperative game, like some story-based game where every player is just a little bit different. Maybe it's a fantasy game and your player can fly, or your player can hit something really hard, or your player can cast a magic spell.
Your player is the only one that can heal other players or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so those are examples of asymmetric games. There are some bad things about asymmetric games.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's a really kind of fun, encouraging thing, a really kind of positive aspect to asymmetric games. Another positive aspect to asymmetric games is that there's a lot more replayability in an asymmetric game.
Yes.
If there are, whether it's characters or something else, even games like Pandemic, all the players, all the different kinds of players have different powers, but you can mix and match those powers. Say there's 6 possible characters available, each one with their own power in a game, and you're playing a 4-player game. Well, the next time around, you could maybe mix in some of those other powers. And so without having to buy another game, or without having to use a game that has a story, so you're marching your way through a story,
Right.
You're able to get a little bit of extra replayability out of a game because of these asymmetric player powers.
It can feel familiar yet new. There's new things you can discover on how characters interact with each other.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a couple of the bad things.
Sure.
The big one is asymmetric games are much harder to teach to everyone, but especially to kids. Because we've played games like this with kids and they're like, well, but you get to do that. Why don't I get to do that?
And I mentioned before, sometimes with an asymmetric game, you might want to play it in a symmetric way first to kind of get through all of the mechanics of the game and get through the base level, how the game works. And this is a perfect example of why. If you have players that either aren't gamers or players that are a little bit younger and they might not be able to kind of balance that stuff the first time around, playing an asymmetric game symmetrically might help with that. But this is certainly a downside to an asymmetric game.
Right. And not every asymmetric game can be played that way. And we're going to get into a few different examples.
Mm-hmm. The other thing about asymmetric games that is kind of implicitly more difficult is the balancing of the game is way harder when people's abilities are different.
Yeah. We have definitely noticed, specifically in some cooperative games, like, oh, you literally can't play this game without this character over here.
Right.
You have to have them. Mm-hmm. Okay, that feels, I don't want to play that character. That doesn't feel great.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about a couple of examples of types of asymmetric games.
Sure.
Our personal favorites are probably the 2-player only asymmetric games where it's very defined from the very beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I think that these are just the ones that seem to work the best. A lot of asymmetric games are either cooperative or 2-player or one versus many.
Yeah.
And one versus many in a family context, unless like all the kids are beating up on mom or dad or something like that, is often pretty difficult.
Yeah.
So we like the 2-player ones or the cooperative ones.
Yeah. I think our favorite of these 2-player really asymmetric games are Skulk Hollow
And Malpeak.
and Malpeak, which are very different. I mean, one person is these like giant bad guys and the other person has this army of tiny little people.
Yep. And they fight.
There's The Hunt and Watergate, which feel similar in a lot of ways, but it's two very different goals, even if you can take the same actions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Watergate obviously about Nixon and the whole Watergate scandal, and so one person is playing as Nixon and his
Team.
compadres,
Yeah.
his
Conspirators.
people, his co-conspirators would be a good way to put it, and then the other side is playing as the journalists, and so it's this constant tug back and forth. The Hunt is German and British forces
Yeah.
trying to sink a boat that I have forgotten the name of, or a submarine that I've forgotten the name of.
So the British are trying to find and sink the Graf Spee.
Graf Spee. That's
The Germans are trying to sink as many British ships as they can
right.
and not get found.
Yep. Well, the British are trying to deliver goods to ports and optionally sink the Graf Spee.
Yeah, fair.
Of course, our favorite asymmetric game.
Yeah, is Jekyll versus Hyde. This is interesting in that both players have exactly the same actions, but their goals are completely opposed from each other.
So in Jekyll versus Hyde, if you don't remember, Jekyll is trying to keep the win and loss of tricks kind of balanced, and Hyde is trying to win or lose as many as possible.
As many as possible. Keep that difference as large as possible.
So then there's one versus many games, which is a different kind of a thing. This is what I mentioned before, where one person is playing as often a villain or some kind of thing like that, or a clue giver or something in a marginally more cooperative way, I suppose, but not necessarily. And so this would be games like Scotland Yard, where one person is trying to get away, everybody else trying to find them.
Yeah. Or Pyramid of Penguin, which we reviewed years ago, where the Penguin is trying to capture everyone and everyone else is trying to get treasures and not get captured.
Mm-hmm. Or Visitor in Blackwood Grove, where you have a clue giver and they have created some kind of a rule, like the green glass door, if you know that game, and everybody's trying to figure out what that rule is. So this is actually not a cooperative game that almost kind of feels a little bit like a cooperative game. It's kind of weird in that way.
Yeah, well, Visitor in Blackwood Grove, there are 3 distinct roles. There is the visitor, there is the kid. So the two of them are trying to kind of cooperate. Ish. And then there are the agents who are trying to guess the rule to capture the visitor. The kid is trying to guess the rule to help the visitor escape, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But then you also have games like Codenames or Just One, which are, I mean, Codenames is teams, but that team is being cooperative while you have a clue giver who's trying to kind of read the clues, or Landmarks, which we've talked about recently, or Just One, which is the same kind of a deal.
So I was going to ask you if you thought that clue-giving games are asymmetric by nature. I think they are.
I think they are. I mean, you make it symmetric writ large when you have everybody take turns being all the different pieces, but the gameplay loop is an asymmetric gameplay loop. One person is giving clues, the other person is guessing those clues.
Yeah, so some games have that built in that you're like, oh, well, everybody's going to take turns being the clue giver.
Yep.
So that would feel a little less asymmetric, but games like Similo,
Sure.
there is one clue giver and everyone else are the guessers.
Mm-hmm.
Or, just one or whatever. Like, that's how it's going to work.
Right. Or here's a really interesting one, Spyfall, where it's asymmetric because one person is trying to lie to everybody. But you don't even know who that person is at the beginning, and that's the whole point. It's the whole hidden identity thing of a game like Spyfall. So that's a really interesting take on this kind of asymmetric idea. But I think we're really clearly defining here what asymmetry is in video games, which I think is really good. But there's so many different ways to think about it. You can even think about it in the classic, like, character-based way. And this is stuff we talk about all the time.
Yeah, I mean, your Dice Throne, your Unmatched, your Disney Villainous, games where you get to select from a panoply of characters and you're gonna battle it out against other characters. There are certainly some similarities in how things work across the game, but every single character is really their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
A much more compact version of this is Pocket Paragons. Each character has like a 7-card deck, and the same 7 symbols are going to appear, but all of the things, the ways in which those symbols work for a character get different.
Yep. Obviously, your CCGs are by definition asymmetric, right? Because everybody's deck is built a little bit differently. Thinking how far back this goes. So what's the earliest asymmetric game that you can think of?
Oh, there's one in the Klutz Book of Games, which was compiled by Sid Saxon. It's not Nine Men's Morris. It's like Fox and the Hounds or something like that, where it's one of those one player wants to capture the second player wants to surround the first player or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back, like in the annals of history, you clearly see that asymmetric games exist. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, people are playing roles even as the roles are represented just by a couple of rocks.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But in the modern era, probably Cosmic Encounter
is
held up as one of the earlier, asymmetric games.
Well, and that's one where you can have a bunch of players, but everybody's stuff works differently.
Mm-hmm. We kind of mentioned some of these before, but there are many cooperative games that have asymmetry in them to really help each player feel like they are a special contributing part of the whole. So like Pandemic is a good example. Endangered is an example of this. Even Disney Animated, where everybody's got a different movie, and so you kind of have slightly different goals.
You help each other in very different ways in Disney Animated, so I definitely think that fits as asymmetric.
Yeah,
how about Sherlock Solitaire? When you play it cooperatively.
Yeah, I mean, you're given a card that basically says that these icons do very slightly different things for you versus the other player.
Yeah.
So sure. I mean, I think that would qualify as well. So asymmetry in games, really interesting mechanic, can make things more difficult for the developers, but assuming the developers do a good job, it definitely adds a lot of flavor to the game.
Yeah, I agree. All right, moving on to our second set of terms.
Sure.
We're going to talk about auction games and or bidding games. These are not quite the same thing. They're very closely related.
Okay, so let's talk about auction games. So an auction is a system where one or more players might offer something up in exchange for something else. Something is being made available and people are indicating that they would like to purchase it effectively. And so they're going to be offering something else up. Usually it's money, but it might not be. It might be cards that, you don't actually know. I'm going to give you 3 cards for that thing, or 4 cards or whatever, and people are bidding. Honestly, you could almost say that the negotiation of trading in a game like Catan is a slight auction-like mechanic where you're basically trying to outdo the other person to trade with the active player.
I think trading can turn into an auction unintentionally.
Yeah, exactly. Although I guess that's a little bit more bidding, really.
Yeah.
It's more the bid part of an auction. So the auction has a bigger structure around it.
Auctions always have winning and losing bidders. Like that is part of what makes an auction. Sometimes the losing bidders can get some kind of compensation for losing, but not always. But here's the trick. Like I was looking into this, bidding does not always mean an auction.
Sure, that's true.
There are games like Wits and Wagers where everybody's putting a bid down, but there's no like winner, like you're not winning a thing by
the
bidding.
other thing about auctioning really is that usually an auction affords people the opportunity to go back and forth, as opposed to bidding, which doesn't always do that.
Right. So we're going to try not to use them interchangeably, but this is why
they are very related terms.
It's a Venn diagram that's mostly overlapped, but there are a few bidding games that aren't auctions, and there are some forms of auctions that don't actually involve bidding.
Yeah, it's the MasterCard logo.
So I started to dive into this. There are lots of different ways that auctions have been represented in games. And that's why this is kind of hard to define cleanly. Most of the time when we talk about auctions, we're talking about blind bidding or sealed bidding. Everyone is putting in an offer, nobody else can see what that offer is, and then everything gets revealed. But it doesn't have to be that way. I think of For Sale, in which it's like, oh, well, it's your turn to bid, and then it's the next person's turn to bid, and then it's the next person's, and you can only bid higher or pass. So that's an open information auction. You know how much other people are willing to pay, and you keep going around until somebody wins. There's also closed economy versus open economy auctions. closed economy gets more interesting because this is the money or the resources that get spent in the auction are directly given to the participants in the auction. A great example of this is Ra. Your resource is this disc with a number on it, and you end up trading it to the person who you won the auction from. But another example would be Big Top, which we reviewed a couple of years ago.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, that's a closed economy. Somebody wins the auction, and then they get all the money.
They get the money from the auction, and there's not a lot that goes back and forth to the bank.
Right. Things only go back and forth to the bank if the auctioneer is the person who wins the auction.
Yeah. I mean, there are...
Which is kind of weird, but sure. We already talked about for sale goes around a bunch of times, but games like Raw only go around once. So you've got one chance to make your bid, and you want to make it count. And if you're the last person to go, in turn order, that gives you all the information you need. Mm-hmm. If you're the first person, you're guessing hard.
So there's another kind, and actually a lot of games that we really like have this kind of bidding where you're basically bidding on your turn order. And some examples of this, and we'll talk about them as we go along. Some examples of this are Nidavellir, Gutenberg, Shipshape, sort of, and Filler. So most recently we played Nidavellir, like 2 weeks ago that we played this. Yep. And in Nidavellir, you allocate a coin to each of 3 different tracks.
Yes, each of the 3 different, taverns. Mm-hmm. You reveal one tavern at a time, and then whoever had the highest coin for that tavern gets first pick, right? Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't go around in clockwise or counterclockwise order. It literally goes in the order that people bid.
Right.
And then you go to the next one, and then you go to the next one. So it's like a stacked bidding on turn order that happens. And obviously they're different for every tavern. Yeah. So that's really nice.
And Gutenberg does that too. You set up all of your little cubes ahead of time of I really want to do this. I want to do this thing a little bit less. I think there's 4 tracks or 4 or 5 different options.
But Gutenberg is different. So Gutenberg, everybody has roughly the same amount of, I think it's supposed to be ink. Yeah. But this resource, this economy, this, I don't know what you would call it. But you allocate an amount of that currency into each of the various sections of the board,
of your little bidding board. Yeah.
Actions, right? It's kind of action selection and bidding put together.
Right.
And it's I love that game so much. It's really, really, really neat the way it works.
But when I started looking into this, I was like, oh yeah, Filler is also totally a game where you bid on turn order. Sure. Because in Filler, this is a game with multi-use cards. You pick a card from your hand at the beginning of each round to say what time you're coming into work. And then everybody reveals, and the person with the earliest time goes first and gets to do their whole turn first. That's an interesting one where it's only one small component of the game, but it can very much change your strategy because it's one of those, if you go last, maybe there's nothing left that you can actually make that day and you feel like your turn was wasted. Mm-hmm. So I like that bidding on turn order feeling. It's not exactly an auction in that case. Everybody's going to get a turn, but what you're bidding on is where you fall in the turns.
Right.
Shipshape, which we love but haven't played in a while, also does this, except Shipshape has the weird thing that you're not going to get to choose what piece you take on your turn. You're bidding on turn order, but you're bidding specifically on I really want to be first because I want to take the top thing. I don't want anything else. Or I really want to be this spot in the middle, and if someone bumps me up, I'm not going to get what I wanted because now I'm first and I have to take what's on the top.
Right. And I've played other games that do this kind of thing. It hasn't. Yeah. I can't remember any off the top of my head, but I definitely have played with this kind of a mechanic before.
So speaking of Shipshape, that had something that I also ran across in researching some more auction stuff. The way bidding works in Shipshape is called sealed bid with cancellation. This is important because it's a very specific way of working. It's a type of blind auction. Everybody picks the thing they're going to bid, and once everybody has picked, you reveal simultaneously. In this cancellation type, when there are ties, the highest non-duplicated bid wins. And that's part of what made Shipshape interesting, is that if you played a high number because you really wanted to go first, but somebody else also played the same high number because they really wanted to go first, congratulations, the two of you now go last.
Yeah, was it King of 12 that did the same thing?
Possibly.
Yeah, I think that game had the same kind of an.
I've definitely seen it other places, but
yep.
I liked it the most in Ship Shape because you're both looking for a very specific spot in the turn order, and it's really easy to get bumped off from that.
Yep.
And now I'm going to talk about the auction mechanic that got me thinking about all of this.
Yeah.
We've been playing a ton of Floristry.
Yeah,
Floristry is a Dutch auction. A Dutch auction is you have a static resource that everybody's going to want, but it goes down in price over time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically a waiting game of everybody wants to get it for the lowest possible price, but how low can it go before somebody takes it before you?
Mm-hmm.
Floristry happens to do this through an app, but this also shows up in various kinds of open drafting games where there's a series of cards that people are generally going to want, and they slide down a track getting cheaper
Mm-hmm.
as people take cards out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in the real world,
The real world.
this actually exists. So this is what Amazon freelance Amazon delivery drivers
Oh,
do.
sure.
So, I mean, at least there was a big expose about this. Maybe things have changed. And I know that Amazon employs more of these people than they used to, but they used to have these 1099 drivers. And I think the people that are driving in like non-Amazon branded vans,
They're probably this kind of thing, yeah.
But they had an app, and the value that Amazon would pay for a given route would slowly go up until someone claimed it.
Yeah, that sounds like a Dutch auction, but almost in reverse. Like
it's the opposite of floristry.
You have a specific resource that you can offer, which is your time.
Your time to deliver. Yep.
And you wait until the value of what you're going to get for that time is as high as possible.
Right. But you want to get it before somebody else gets it because their threshold is just a tiny bit lower.
It's just a little bit lower.
Yeah. So they literally turned Amazon delivery into a game.
Yeah.
It's kind of gross.
Did. So, yeah, hopefully this helped a little bit if you've thought of auction games and be like, man, but I didn't think, this doesn't look like an auction to me. Like, what do you mean? There's lots of different ways to do an auction. And, I kind of went down the rabbit hole in
Yeah, you really did, actually.
in seeing how this works.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right. And with that, I think, Anitra, it is time for our back talk.
It is. So I guess we'll start with talking about the favorite flowers from 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, that was the question from a couple of weeks ago. There's only a couple of answers on Facebook. I'm just going to list both of them. One of them is from the game Gin Rummy Super. They said that they love tulips, which, tulips
are
lovely.
nice.
And the other one is Mark. Oh, Mark. And, of course, this is Mark Spector from Grand Gamers Guild, who agrees with me. He says, actually, it's not Gold Medal or King Richard or whatever that one is, but it is Baker's Corner all-purpose.
That's the Aldi brand.
That is the Aldi brand.
He's not the only one to make that joke, though. Peter on the Discord said, all-purpose, usually it's versatile. Even better if it can be the stuff imported from Italy that has a whole different type of wheat.
I mean, I would love to try like a different flour with a different kind of wheat. That actually sounds kind of cool.
But we did get several responses on Discord in the spirit of the question.
Oh, come on. Ours was in the spirit of the question. Anyway, Ken Walter starts with the Columbine, which I think I've seen these before, but I didn't know what they were called. He said he likes them for lots of reasons, but they are a very pretty flower.
Yeah, I think they're technically a wildflower.
A purple floppy flower. That's the only way for me to...
Adrian said it's hard to pick just one, but right now it's the sunflower, a nice big bright color. And Adrian also says that, yes, she's old, and that's part of why she likes payday.
Yeah, we talked about that last time, too. JP DeCosta agrees, got to pick a gargantuan sunflower. They can be epic. His older daughter says that roses are her favorite.
Kristen, who is Bruins Buzz, says, my favorite flowers are from my backyard. I have a snowball bush, and it has the sweetest smell at the start of spring.
I don't know anything about a snowball bush. I don't know what that is. I don't know what it looks like.
So I just looked up a picture of the snowball bush. It kind of looks like a lilac, except way more densely packed with the flowers, and obviously generally white or a light yellow.
Almost made me think like phlox, kind of?
The bush kind of phlox. Yes,
yeah.
which is not what we have in our yard.
Morgify says, lavender for me. I have 4 different bushes with 3 varieties, and I just can't get enough.
Wow, that's a lot of lavender.
Mm-hmm.
we went into a little side discussion about lilacs, which we have one scraggly lilac bush in our backyard.
It is very lame. It is a lame lilac bush.
It's better than no lilac bushes.
Technically true.
And then the Joyful Jedi says, Phlox and Larkspur. Because I had a D&D character I named Phlox Larkspur.
It's a good D&D name. I got to give you credit. It's a good one.
Yeah. Lots of fun flowers to look up. I did not know what phlox was until a couple of years ago when I looked up what the flower was that we had growing in our front garden. It smells a lot like lilacs, so I like it a lot, but it looks like a giant weed until it finally blooms in the fall. So that's it for our back talk this week about flowers. New back talk.
Okay, so our new back talk this week is kind of in the spirit of the high-level meta conversation that we had, not so much the specifics. We're talking board game terms this week. What are some board game terms that you would like to talk about? Are there board game terms that you think are controversial? Is it Ameritrash or whatever it might be? We want to know what you want to hear so that we can tell you so that you'll listen to us. That's kind of how it all works.
Yeah, so tell us what board game term you want us to explore and take a deep dive into like I did with auctions. And where can you tell us
Oh, you're asking
all
me?
that stuff?
Oh, well, you can find us on the internet at Family Gamers AA for Andrew and Anitra. All over the place. Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all at Family Gamers AA. You can also find us on YouTube as The Family Gamers. That's fine. Of course, you can also get to the community by going to thefamilygamers.com/community or just going to Facebook and searching for The Family Gamers Community. We're not hard to find, and that's kind of on purpose.
You can also join the family tabletop community on Discord, where obviously we get a lot of backtalk. You can get an invite there by going to thefamilygamers.com/Discord.
Or, of course, you can email us, Andrew at thefamilygamers.com.
Anitra at thefamilygamers.com.
Please don't forget to subscribe to the show, tell your friends about the show, and leave us a review at Apple Podcast or whatever your podcast subscription source is. You can also find us on Amazon Music, on TuneIn, on Spotify, and on YouTube Music. So pull it up and give us a listen while you're toiling away at work.
The Family Gamers is sponsored by First Move Financial. Go to firstmovefinancial.com/familygamers to learn how the team at First Move Financial can help you pile up the victory points.
Thanks so much to the team over there at First Move for sponsoring the show. So, Anitra, I think we need to find some asymmetric games to play. Like I'm honestly,
Asymmetric auction games?
Well, I mean, I don't. I was going to say I'm not really a big auction game person. I like bidding games, not so much auction games. So maybe we'll play some bidding games or some asymmetric games. If you can find some asymmetric bidding games, I'm on board.
I mean, Cosmic Encounter, which neither one of us likes.
I don't like
but,
that game, actually. Like, I respect that game, but I don't like that game.
Me either.
All right. Well, anyway, we will find some games to play, and we're going to tell you guys all about it next week. But until then,
Play games with your kids.